build spirit. We must be a team.
Business is war. It's dog eat dog, rat eat rat.
You gotta have a problem.
Hi, I'm William Bryant, and since I did a video on contribution margin, I was going to show a little bit of data and discuss contribution margin at a very high level, because visualizing what I'm talking about is sometimes just easier. So let me start this for a screen recording. The data I'm using, I just quickly calculated in gross profit, gross margin, contribution margin, and the contribution margin percentage just for giggles. The data that I got is actually a customer list of orders, B2B manufacturing. And you've got the order number, sales individual, the customer name, product types. There's 5 that are categorized as commodity products, and there's 5 that are categorized as specialty products, just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just to keep it simple. And there are volumes for the order, revenue, material cost, labor cost, and SG&A breakdown for the cost as well. Now, I turn this into a table just because sometimes working with tables are a little bit easier, especially you can add slicers to it and, flip around and do this kind of fun stuff. You can do it with pivot tables as well, but, just for a quick look, this is kind of nice sometimes. Okay, so I did some quick stuff over here, products. First thing I wanted to do is look at this SG&A cost, because in order to get the contribution margin, you have to get all of the variable costs out. Just because it's SG&A, that's the general part, right, and admin, there's got to be some fixed in there. And if you were to just simply look at this on the way that they had actually done the allocation, of course, this is just fake data, right? But the 50 cents would have been allocated each volume unit in the case of the commodity products, and the 350 to the specialty products. That would be variable cost, obviously, because it's a variable with the number of units. And so in order to dig in a little bit deeper, hoping that there's some kind of a relationship here, I did a regression of the SG&A on the volume, okay? And so I just used the linear estimation function in Excel. It's the linest. And the dependent variable being the cost, the independent variable being the volume. And I did end up, there we go, with the slope of 44 cents as a variable cost. Now, obviously it's probably not constant for, every product for the variable overhead, but this is what we're going to use just so I can break out a variable overhead and a fixed overhead. And it might be, okay, bearing that there is an R squared of 85, and so that's not too bad. And just looking at the fact that specialty products probably require specialty equipment, which might cost considerably more. And so in terms of that fixed overhead and the expenses for the equipment, you might have to allocate more overhead to those specific products. And there's obviously not as many products either. And so it is going to be a little bit skewed from that perspective. So this might not be too bad. We're going to treat it in this fashion though. And so if you look, I've broken it out in the variable and the fixed. I also wanted to know what is our total overhead allocation that we're going to allocate to these products, and got the 12 million for the variable and the 15.9 for the fixed, for a total of 28.5 million overhead that we're going to allocate. If we're going to look at it from a gross margin perspective, and standard look, we're going to run revenue, full costing, right? So that's going to be all of the direct materials, direct labor, and the SG&A costs assigned to each product. And we come out with a couple of negatives for our gross profit, right? Commodity 5 and 4 here. And we can see the margins on them, pretty slim on the commodity products, which makes sense if that's kind of a standard non-customized product line. And just for giggles, I broke out unit prices and the full unit cost. But again, note that the full unit cost is inclusive of how you are allocating, and how you are allocating depending on the methodology. Like, are you doing it on certain labor hours? Are you doing it on machine hours? Are you just simply doing it by unit? Are you doing it on square foot area, like for depreciation allocation? There are different methods for which you are going to do the allocation, and if they're not ideal for whatever given area that you're running that allocation, like for example, if you're doing service to service and you're running IT allocation to your departments, you might want to look at the total number of individuals using computers. That's how you're probably going to do the allocation. And so those kinds of things make sense. And so you want it to make sense, and how you do it is going to have an impact, as you will see. Because when we then run down to the contribution margin, which is a little bit different, again, we have the volumes and the revenue, but this time we're looking at variable costing, which all the variable costing is going to be the direct material, direct labor, and that variable overhead that we are going to tag into each product. And the variable overhead might have commission involved, right? Because it's part of selling. And so that's what we're going to look at. And that might make sense from the sg&a perspective. Maybe you do get 44 cents a unit, regardless of whether it's commodity or specialty. It could be something that is the way they run operations. Again, the negatives on the commodity 5 and commodity 4 products, they're pretty big. Those are two lines that you'd really want to kind of dive into and look at. Obviously, product 5, because it is the bulk of the volume, probably at least a third, maybe 25% of your product line is commodity. Probably should have actually broke that out here, but I'm just curious right now, real quickly. Okay, so 38% of your total volume is going to be product 5. That was bad math in my head. So because so many of your products are of this category, and you're actually running a negative contribution, I was also curious, okay, well, what is the unit contribution? How much is it negative per unit? And it's 65 cents a unit. So that's something that now maybe if you're trying to undercut the market, or you've got some steep competition in there, the life cycle of product is deep into maturity, maybe you're just kind of trying to shake out the rest of the people who were in there so you can be the last one standing or something, and so you're running an undercut on the on that pricing. But if not, looking at that adjustment, your bottom bound for your pricing probably should be the variable costs that go into actually creating the product. And notice that these are the variable costs that are going into it. There's no overhead from the fixed allocation that ends up being a little bit more arbitrary. It's just the material and the labor that goes into it. And so you can't have that product without that. So that's kind of why it's a unique way to look at your profitability and your costs for that matter. The other one is that commodity 4, which you're looking at a 462 negative. Now, of course, we can also take a look back up at the unit price. And so 462 is what of 70 here. So that's 5%. So you're running 5% of your total cost. You could probably bump that 5% and be okay. It's a $77 item, $78 item. Again, maybe you're using that for a specific function strategically, but it does highlight the fact that, hey, you know what, just with regards to our labor and our materials, this is something we want to look at for a pricing mechanism, right, or a pricing strategy. Now, the reason why I also wanted to kind of look at profitability and product, those two aside, maybe we look at commodity 4 or commodity 1. Okay, we know that this is only 2%. We could run the same thing here with that specialty product too, because it's only 9% on a specialty product. But say we wanted to eliminate one of these. The thing that you have to consider is they have a positive contribution margin, and so your question is then, how much overhead is actually being allocated that they're absorbing? Because that becomes important. Contribution margin, the name comes from the fact that after you deduct those variable costs from the revenue, the amount left over is there to contribute to paying those fixed costs and profit. I mean, that's kind of what is the leftover. And with this commodity product 1, we're looking at that 2.1 million of variable overhead and that 300,000 of fixed overhead. Now, the 2.1 is probably going to go with the product line if we were to eliminate it. No big deal. But that 300,000, well, that 300,000 isn't going to go away. It's a fixed overhead that's allocated to it. Perhaps they shared the same building and some other heavy machinery or something. And that overhead there, inclusive, because you've got to also do, if it's a factory, you've got all of the fixed salaries and all that gets allocated in there. And so that 300,000 probably isn't going away if that product line goes. What happens is that 300,000 has to get deducted by allocation to the other remaining product lines. And so you end up losing that from your net. And so that's just something to consider as you're going along and you're actually making these decisions. Because making these decisions from a gross level is sometimes a little bit obscured by the way you do that fixed overhead allocation. And that's really what I was just getting at with that, because contribution margin isn't common to use, and so it helps to have a little bit of an example to see what you're really doing when you're doing the analysis. And it also adds to the fact that you focus in on those costs directly. And as I kind of mentioned, because you draw everything out fixed, it draws attention to that operation leverage, right? And because part of that fixed is often, can be a financing in there as well, you can pull out the financing leverage too. And so just by running this method, it gives you a completely different internal analysis to approach. And since cost, regardless of whether you try to do cost leader, whatever that aspect is, costs are always a concern, because they're one of the best ways to judge things like efficiency and then work on your margin, right? And so looking at it from this perspective, it gives you that data analytic methodology that I was kind of talking about, because big data alone is just a lot of data. So you have to have a method to get into it. But there it is. Thank you.